Hey guys, Sarah Cray here with Let's Make Art, and last week I showed you how to do a really fun and loose ice cream cone in less than 5 minutes, and this is great for anybody starting watercolor or maybe been painting for a bit and just wants to do something quick and fun. But I thought it would be really great to show you how you can take the idea of something, the basic shape, and just by adjusting the values, you can create something that is more dimensional and is a bit more realistic and has more form. So go ahead and get a fresh piece of paper. And you can see here that I've already kind of sketched my ice cream and my cone with the waffle lines, okay? You don't have to do that, but sometimes it's nice having a guide. I'm just using a 6x9 piece of watercolor paper. I just cut in half a 9x12, and now we're ready to go. So I'm gonna list all the paints, supplies, everything that I'm using in the description, but we're gonna start with the cone. And so I'm gonna use my round 12, and I'm just gonna start putting brown in my cone. Now we don't have to worry about this being a perfect even wash, because if you look at ice cream cones, they have different colors of brown depending on how they were cooked, right? Sometimes they're left in there a little extra longer, so they have some darker brown. Sometimes they haven't been cooked long enough, so a really light brown. So just know that it's okay if there's variation to your browns. I am adding a darker value along the edge of the cone and underneath where the ice cream is going, just kind of showing that this is dimensional. By having this darker value along the edges, we're showing that it's kind of turning away from the light, okay? And sometimes if it's like a strong edge like this, I'll just go in and kind of blend it out, just a tad, nothing too crazy. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to let this mostly dry. And the reason why we want this cone to be dry or mostly dry for this next step is we are actually going to lift out the color using a liner brush for the highlights on the ridges of our cone. If you do this while your painting is very wet, then as soon as you lift it out, the paint is just going to seep right back into wherever you lift it out. So sometimes it's nice to have it mostly dry, because then you can kind of control that lift a little bit more. So I'm just going off the grid that I created with in my drawing sketch. And you might have to, I mean, depending on the paint you're using, depending on how long it's been dry, you might have to do it a couple times. Like do one lift and then go back and do another to really get that highlight. So I'm using a liner for this just because it's a little bit easier to keep an even thick line with a liner as opposed to a round, but you can absolutely use a round too for something like this. And you'll notice that after I use the water, or after I pick up water, I hit it on my paper towel. And the reason why I do that is because sometimes when we pick up water, there's like the tip of our paintbrush is holding a bit more water, because when you put it down, gravity-wise, all that water sinks to the tip. So by just kind of dabbing that tip, I'm getting rid of that excess drop. Now it's possible that even with that extra little tap on there, you might get like a thicker line. But don't worry, because when we go back in to do the shadows on our cone, we can kind of reshape some of these lines. So don't stress too much if as you're lifting, one of the lines got thicker than another one, or just a thicker portion. It's not the end of the world. And if you have enough water on your brush and you're just doing thin areas, you might be able to just keep going a couple times. If your pencil marks were really dark, sometimes what helps is to actually go below or above your pencil mark line instead of right on it. And the reason why we do that is because if we lift right over the pencil mark line, then we're actually showing our pencil line. Whereas if we go right underneath it, then that highlight is going to stay a nice light value. Also, as you're doing this and lifting, there's different values involved. As in some value, like the lifted area might show up stronger across the dark values than across the light values, or vice versa. Don't stress too much if the lifting is not perfectly even throughout. Again, waffle cones are all made differently, and sometimes you get a strong lift and highlight, and sometimes it kind of actually evens out. So don't stress too much if the lifting portion and highlight is not completely even throughout. We're going to let that be for a second. I'm going to move to ice cream. So I'm going to use my round 6, and very similar to what we did in last week's, I'm just going to use water. And I'm not afraid of a little bit of a pencil mark on my paper, so I don't stress too much about erasing. That's more your call. Then I'm going to take some green and just start to kind of drop it in. Notice that I'm kind of dropping and then smearing. I am not going back and forth. And the reason for that is we still want there to be some highlights. Okay. Now I'm going to touch this area very little right here because this is where the highlight is going to be on my ice cream. And then kind of especially around this roughly area, I'm going to drop in some darker values because we're showing that the ice cream is being curled up, right? It's not a perfectly smooth line or smooth texture. So just by introducing this medium value in here, I'm already starting to feel like my cone has a bit more dimension to it. Okay, and then while it's wet like this, I'm going to take some Paynes Gray and a little bit of brown to get like a gray brown. And I'm going to start dropping this in for my chocolate chips. Now what we're doing here is, you know when you're eating ice cream and you can kind of see the hint of a chocolate chip deep within, and you're like, oh yeah, I know if I take that bite, I'm going to get a good bite of chocolate. So we're kind of showing that there's like chocolate chips within the ice cream, and then when this has dried, we'll go back in and do dark chocolate chips on top, okay? So that feels pretty good. Let's do one more run of dark value here. Again, I'm kind of going along the sides of the ice cream and kind of dropping it in within this kind of roughly texture of my cone, or of my ice cream, excuse me. Okay, that feels pretty good. We're going to let that be for a second. We're going to go back to our cone. And hopefully our cone is dried now. If not, you can just let it dry or use a heated craft tool. And I'm going to take brown. And in between these little sections here, I'm going to put in along the top that shadow, rinse my brush, and then just pull that color down to fill out that diamond. And I'm going to repeat that across. Now this is where if maybe your highlight got a little bit too thick, you can go in and kind of thin it out. Now with watercolor, remember you can always go darker. So if you're unsure how dark to make this, you know, start with just a little bit darker and put that in and see how that feels. Because remember, you can always go back and layer, but it's much trickier to lift out. It's possible, it's just a little bit harder. Also, when we think about shadows and values, my center here, where the light is kind of hitting a little bit more, even though I'm adding like this shadowed area on these diamonds, the ones on the edges are going to be a little bit darker because they're turning away from us. Also the ones underneath the cone. So when we were kind of putting in that dark value on that initial wash, we have to think that the shadow also is going to follow that same rules that we set when doing that first wash, if that makes any sense. And also remember, like, ice cream cones can get wonky. It's okay, you know? They're not going to be totally perfect. They still taste just as good though. Okay, we're almost done filling these out. And remember, you can go in and clean some areas up. Sometimes though, if things are getting like too even and perfect, sometimes just taking a damp brush and blending some things out, like just kind of softens everything and makes it feel as a single unit. So what I mean by that is, like, I know logically that this is going to adjust the values that I just put in, but sometimes just smearing a few things around, just with a barely damp brush, it just kind of makes it feel like a single cone as opposed to a bunch of different units. But you can decide if that's something you want to do. Like, that is probably more a stylistic preference as opposed to, you know, realism. But it's up to you. And then think about it this way. When we're adding values to a cone, the darker the value is that we put inside this diamond shape, the deeper that hole is going to fill. Okay, so I'm gonna show what I mean by that. Like, let's see what happens when I do a really, really dark brown on this section right here. So looking at this, if I were to run my finger across that, because this is so dark, it feels like my finger can go in there deeper than the rest. Do you see what I'm saying? So whenever you're trying to do shadows or trying to communicate different planes, think about the darker the value is, the farther away or like deeper that section is going to seem to the viewer. So if you're looking at your ice cream cone and you're like, some of these holes feel like holes, you know, you can just think about, look at how the values relate to each other. And that can be why some of them feel deeper. And then if you go too dark, you can just take a clean brush and lift. And that's going to lighten that value. And that kind of creates a cool texture too, because it's going to have a hard edge by lifting out. So maybe you like that look, you know? Okay, we're going to leave the cone for a second. let's go back to our mint chocolate chip ice cream. I'm going to take a darker green. And this is where you can do a little bit of dry brush texture. And dry brush is when you pick up paint, have your brush be mostly dry, and you get this scrapey kind of texture on your ice cream. And this dry brush technique is excellent for so many things. If you've been painting with me for a bit, you know how much I love that technique. But it's great for wall texture, it's great for branches, it's great for feathers, it's just great. I love it. Okay. Now you'll notice that as you add values to something, the areas that we left highlighted or left alone, they're going to start separating more and more. So sometimes, even though we wanted to leave, a section alone to be our highlight, if our value gets too dark, that highlight is going to read as white. And so sometimes we have to go in and just kind of close that gap between the values. Okay. And I feel like I can even push it one more. As one more of dark green in here. Yeah, that feels good. Now for beginners especially, the range of values that you can create, there's a lot. And so that can be really overwhelming if you're just starting out. So my rule of thumb is just have a light, a medium, and a dark value. If you can have 3 different values, then that is an excellent start to creating form. Now I'm going to add my chocolate chips. And it's up to you how I like a lot of chocolate chips in my mint chip. My favorite mint chip is Baskin-Robbins. That one I think is the best one. And remember to do different sizes too. And they still exist even in the ruffles. And I feel really good about that. I could probably go back and add a little bit of a darker value on some of these diamond shapes. The last thing that I want to talk about is this shadow of a cone. And this is where it gets really tricky because a cone doesn't stand by itself, right? Like that defies the laws of gravity. So you'll be tempted to add a shadow as if it is standing by itself, but like you don't have to because there's no way this cone would be just standing there. If you do want to do a shadow, maybe you can do it floating. So if you wanted to do a floating, like the cone is floating in space, then it would be a shadow down here. If you want it as if the cone is touching the ground, the shadow will start at the tip and then go out. I decided not to put a shadow in my cone though, because unless I have a hand holding it, unless there is something holding it, an ice cream cone wouldn't be floating in space. So I didn't feel the need to ground it because it doesn't exist that way. However, you guys are the artists here. So if it really bothers you that it's just floating and you're like, I don't care that a cone is just floating in space, it needs to have a shadow. Okay, put a shadow in. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Okay. There is our more realistic ice cream cone. Obviously, this one took longer. This one took about 20 minutes, but just showing you guys how having a light value, a medium value, and a dark value on your ice cream and on your cone, you can create something that feels more dimensional. And again, values take a lot of practice to be able to see, recognize, recreate, and get them to relate to each other. So don't feel like you have to have it all. The best step to take is to just have light value, medium value, dark value, and that's your base. And then you can go from there. Okay, so I hope this was informational and helpful. I hope that you guys share your paintings. Thank you so much for painting along with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.